Hello, Excellence family. It's Danny Barnes, Director of Agent Relations. I'm here with Paul Sardone, attorney with Excellence Title. Today we're going to talk about open permits and how it affects your buyers. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Paul, how you doing?
Good. How are you guys doing over there?
Good. It's hot. It's hot out there
Yeah.
today.
No, it's hot as anywhere in Florida, no matter where you are. Yeah.
I
So,
think
so today,
perfect, Paul.
yeah, thank everybody for joining us again. I like to talk about things that come up and are kind of relevant to the experience that most agents have. So just last week, and it happens all the time, we had a closing that was affected by an open permit that existed on the property. The seller hadn't closed out. In this case, it was actually from 1993. It was a roof permit from Hurricane Andrew, and that's dozens of times I've dealt with these. So what I want to talk about is how the permits affect your closings, how it affect your buyer. So when you're the excellence agents, you guys are writing up your offers for a buyer, assuming you're using the FAR bar as is. I'm sure you've heard, but if you don't know, that does not cover permits. If there's open permits on the property, the buyer is assuming responsibility for those. Title insurance, which is what we do, also does not cover permits. Permits are considered municipal issues, not a title issue. So if you've ever read the fine print on any title policy in the state, there is an exclusion for permits and municipal ordinances. So, you don't want to close and just say, oh, well, if anything happens, I have title insurance. That's not going to cover you. The contract also doesn't protect your buyers. So I always advise, and I know a lot of agents do it, and it's become more and more common over the years, but when you're writing an offer for a buyer, in the additional terms, you always want to write that the seller will close any open or expired permits prior to closing at the seller's expense. The reason why you do this is it modifies the provision of the contract, which says that, yeah, the seller has to cooperate with the buyer in handling permits and by signing forms allowing access, but they're not required to expend any money. So how this works in real life, the example, the one from the other day was kind of screwy, but let's say you have a buyer, then you write an offer, your buyer sees the house, inspection goes great. We order our title search, it's clear. We order our municipal lien search, and it reveals there's an open permit. Maybe they did a pool. Let's say they did a pool a few years ago. It's a nice pool. Everything looks perfect, but they never finalized, the contractor never did that final inspection where they have to come in and just sign off on it. Maybe it's a formality, maybe it's not. That permit is still open. If your buyer does nothing about it and closes, and then down the road there's an issue, or the building codes change, or codes change as to pools, or whatever it is, they'll be responsible for bringing that up to code and getting that approved. So what ends up happening is the buyer then buys, let's say they decide they're going to add a pergola out there, and they go and they pull the permits, and the county says, the inspector comes out and says, well, you still haven't finalized this pool permit, and now they found an issue with the electrical, they found something out of compliance. Now it becomes a buyer problem, and it could become an expensive buyer problem where they're having to again pay for inspections. They're going to have to reopen permits. They're going to have to do the repairs to bring it up to code. So that's why it's a big deal. You don't want, a buyer doesn't want to buy and inherit that headache. There are cases where buyers and sellers mutually agree that they say, the buyer may say, well, it's fine. I'm going to do a bunch of work on the house. There's an open permit for the roof from 93, but that roof is already bad. It's been so many years. I'm going to replace it anyways. And they're okay with it. And that's fine. I don't have any problem with that. The important thing is for us as the title company, we order that. We don't have to, but we always order that permit search because we want everybody to know kind of what they're getting into. And for the agents, my advice is always add that in when you're representing a buyer. If the seller can't close it out, which has happened, maybe it's a permit and the buyer really needs to close and the seller hasn't, especially now with COVID, you're not getting an inspector out there and quickly, things are slow normally, but now they're like really slow. So I've had buyers and sellers and we work with them and maybe they agree, okay, the seller is going to hold some money in escrow from their closing proceeds until they resolve it, but we still want to close because the buyer needs to get this interest rate or the buyer needs to move. Those things are fine, but the important thing is not to be caught in a situation, which I've seen numerous times, where a buyer is very upset with their agent because I tell them there's a permit and they say, okay, well, I want to cancel. Now they're out of inspections. They can't get out of it. and it's basically on them. And then they're always going to say, they always turn and say, well, why didn't you protect me on this? So the key is to protect your buyers so they feel protected by you, and they keep referring people and keep coming back to you and have a positive experience. So that's the brief part of it. Now the other thing is there's also violations. So a permit is, there's work done. They pull the permit, and for whatever reason they didn't close it out. A violation is an inspector has gone out, and whether it be uncut grass, whether it be an abandoned property or structure that they see is something that was done without a permit, they catch. Those are also not title issues unless there's a lien recorded. So sometimes it's kind of like a warning, and that will come out. So that's not an open permit. That's just a notice of violation. You also want to include that in your additional terms to close out any open permits and or violations at their expense. That's why I recommend that, because a lot of times you'll see maybe they came on, they saw there's a shed back there or something that wasn't permitted, it should have been permitted, and they put a notice of violation on it. Well, that's even more dangerous than a permit, because they have their eye on it. So you close on that house, and 3 months later, that same inspector drives by and sees it. Now it becomes a lien, and you have to demolish it or bring it up to code or have a lien on your house. So those are all the little extra things that are not covered by the title insurance that I highly recommend you guys start including in all your contracts.
Can you go ahead and close? I didn't think you could close a house unless they closed all the permits out. I mean, you can go ahead and close it?
Yeah, you can close it. It's not a title issue. That happens all the time. I mean, it happens where people call me all the time. They've closed on a house and there's permits from the prior owner and they had no idea. And now it's like, it's your responsibility. The new owner.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so that's why a lot of people don't know that, and it becomes a big issue, trust me. And a lot of times it becomes the kind of issue where there's a lot of money in escrow and the seller saying, well, the contract says I don't have to fix it. The buyer saying, I'm not going to close. And then now it becomes a fight over 50 grand that's in escrow. And, it's not a good situation for anybody. So that's why write in the additional terms. If you're using the as is, seller shall close any open or expired permits and or violations at seller's expense prior to closing. It's important you put the timeline on it, because that puts the obligation on them that your buyer can still close if they decide, well, they're working on it and it's not done and I need to close because my rate expires tomorrow and I'm never going to get a 2.75 rate again. That's fine. They could close, but it gives them the power to make this out to say, hey, when you take care of this, then we're closing, and it puts that burden on the sellers. Yeah, obviously, if you're on the listing side of it, you don't want to see that, because it's more work for the seller, potentially more money. But whenever you're writing up an offer for a buyer, you want to include that.
It's good information. I know we do run into a lot of times where, they'll say that it's a new roof, but it was never permitted. They never pulled a permit. Right. They just did it themselves or hired John to do it,
Yeah, that's a whole other can of worms where, it's unpermitted work. So there is a possibility that at some point the county or city or whatever, governing body figures it out. And if that work was not done up to code, the person who bought it is going to be responsible for bringing that up to code.
Right.
Or potentially, like I've had cases where they've added a family room. They've closed out a back porch and turned into a family room. And then they go to do the kitchen, let's say, when the inspector gets in there, they see that that's not up to code, or they look at the microfilms and the plans that they have on file with the county, and they see, well, this was not 2,500 square foot house. This is a 2,000 square foot house, and that is not part of my drawing. So you need to bring that up to code, or you need to tear it down, and then that opens up that can of worms.
Didn't want to get off subject there, but that you brought up a great point there. So that's up to the new owner after that might happen, right?
Right. That's why I usually there's always red flags for that kind of stuff, which is, if the public record says it's a 2.2 and the house is a 4.3, then there's probably some extra bathrooms and rooms put in there without permits, because the county would have updated records. That's a huge red flag. Also, the square footage when it's off. Is another one. But yeah, that's a whole other topic. And there are some protections for buyers in the contract for that. Whereas if the seller did that work without pulling the permits, and they know they did it without permits and they don't disclose it, and then the buyer has an issue, the buyer can sue the seller because there is language in there the seller signs off that they didn't know of any work done without necessary permits. And the FAR bar is this. I did get a seller on that once where it was like a $40,000 dispute.
Wow.
And the seller had done a bunch of work without permits, and then said, "Oh, you signed an as is," but there is a provision in there where the seller certifies that they don't know of any unpermitted work done. So it was on the basis of fraud, basically.
Right.
Yeah, that's all the fun stuff that we deal with.
That's why we need your help all the
Yeah,
time.
that we don't want you guys to deal with. So we try to train you guys, train your agents so that they avoid these problems from the start. So that that's the kind of work we don't want to deal with. We want to do closings. We want happy buyers, happy sellers, and everybody moving on to the next ones.
Right. Well, good info about the open permits and helping our buyers out. Anything else you might want to add, or?
No, I mean, that's it. Just the contract again. If you guys have questions, you can always reach out to me through the workplace or email or call us. If you're writing an offer and you're not sure, or if you're on the seller side and you receive an offer and it has some aggressive language and the additional terms, and you want to make sure your seller is protected based on the fact pattern, that's what we're here for. We're here to help you out with that. And it doesn't have to be just the closing. It could be when if you're writing an offer and we're going to be doing the closing, I'd rather look at it before it gets signed than get it signed, start working on it, and then find out that there's a problem.
Yeah.
So, that's what we're here from the beginning.
That's great. And Paul's really good with communication. I mean, within minutes, he's messaging me back. So we're
It's easy nowadays with the messaging, and just email me a contract. It doesn't have to be anything formal. You can say, "Hey, Paul, take a look at this. Did I do the language right? I'm writing up this offer." Before it's fully executed, and then it's like, I'm going to get it anyways. Might as well before your buyer signs it. It takes me 5 minutes, and I don't mind doing it. I'd rather that than later have to explain to a buyer that there is a situation or have a deal canceled.
Right, and that's why you want to use Excellence Title. Easy to get to. So, well, hey, listen, thanks for doing this again today, and thanks for all of our great agents for tuning in to Title Tuesday.
Thanks for having us. My pleasure.
As always, together moving forward, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks, Paul.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.